School didn't teach us how to be good at love, so I created the Stubborn Love podcast to help you navigate it. With my expertise in the marriage therapy biz, I'll share insights on topics like sex, money, and rock and roll. Navigating conflict, and more. No matter what stage of relationship you're in right now, this podcast is for you. Every episode has actionable tips that will help you create a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life with the people you love. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now and join me on this journey of love and learning for the stuff they didn't teach you in relationship school. Welcome back to another episode of Stubborn Love. I'm so excited for today's episode, as always, and I want to welcome a very special guest, Dr. Elizabeth Mikus. And she's a licensed clinical psychologist who has helped thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of people recover from abusive relationships and heartbreak by transforming their emotional pain and trauma with brain-based perspectives. Here's what we're going to dive into. How romantic breakups activate systems of the brain involved in feeling emotional distress and increase information processing of thoughts, images, and memory. We're also going to talk a little bit about what post-romantic distress is, the neuroscience of heartbreak and its healing, and also dispel some of those common breakup myths. And lastly, we'll dive into how you can have accelerated resolutions for heartbreak. Dr. Mikus, I'm so excited that you're here. Can you please introduce yourself to listeners and let them know your story on how you got into such an interesting topic?
I'm so excited to be here. Well, so I started my training in neuropsychology to become a licensed psychologist. So I knew a lot about the brain. And in the 1990s, we had what they called the decade of the brain, where we were just, in flux of data. We had the fMRIs so we could see the brain at work. And so more and more researchers were starting to look at all kinds of tasks and things, including like how we fall in love with science, with this technology, this new technology. We didn't have to guess what people were thinking. We could actually see different systems at play. I have been teaching other psychotherapists primarily about the neuropsychology of change and brain-based hypnotherapy, eye movement reprocessing therapies, so that they could bring about these rapid resolutions of trauma, post-traumatic distress, anxiety, panic attack, love addiction, grief. And so it was just a natural thing. I was like, who hasn't gone through a breakup and somehow been impacted in the way that they feel and think? And, it's just not logical, right? Like really smart people can say like, I don't even know why I feel this way, but it just comes on. And so I wanted to find a way to really use the science, things that we were learning about falling in love and breaking up and heartbreak, to help people recover and get out of these kind of vague statements that are being made about heartbreak and grief, especially because sometimes I found like it prohibits the rapid resolution of this. Where therapists, and like I said, I primarily had been training therapists. I'm moving to more of the self-help audience here. But with a therapist, they're like stabilizing the problem, validating, and people were getting more stuck and sometimes dropping out of therapy and saying, therapy isn't working for me. I'm just more obsessed with my ex. I'm not getting over it. I don't want to date. And so these newer technologies like using eye movement reprocessing and also hypnosis were doing something different when it came to the brain processing and responding and memory. So we have uncovered that every time we remember something, there's potential to do updates to it and then save it like as a new save as. And they call this theory memory reconsolidation. So many of the therapies that I've been doing, some of them over 30 years, actually follow those principles of memory reconsolidation. So things are happening in the brain. It's rewiring. There's stuff with protein synthesis, and we're creating different updates. I call them new neuroplastic emotional updates in how the memory is formed. And when you think about your ex after you go through one of these processes, and it's only one session, sometimes, 3 sessions, really depends. They're very quick, and you seem like, okay, I don't know how you did that. It's like voodoo, witchcraft, but it's not, it's science. How did something where I was in pain, crying myself to sleep, and now I'm fine. And I don't even know what happened. Well, we changed what the brain was doing. We didn't have to change you. We didn't really need anything from the ex for you to be okay. A lot of people think that I need closure. I need, something from them. I have to understand. But actually, not so much. We know that there's tremendous changes going on with the emotional center, our brain. They're wired to be social and love. And there's a particular system called the panic grief system that activates after a breakup or any disconnection, even when you lose somebody to death or a pet. There's this kind of restlessness and lots of physiological distress, and also crying, sadness, and shutdown. And so that emotion, lots of people knew about, fear and rage, but this panic grief emotion is a different emotion action system that all mammals have. And it really kicks into high gear when there's anything that happens to our connection with people.
Mm.
And when that's unexpected, it's even more so. And then, unlike animals who, they have these distress calls. And so if you lock your, puppy out, it'll probably whine all night to get you to come to it. It will have that restlessness, and the same with, dropping off a kid at daycare. And, so people are well aware of the separation distress calls, but we don't always call it that. And in the science of this, we know that when we can name something, we actually tame it for how this lower brain, the emotional brain, works. Because the emotional brain, sort of in the right brain, starts to have this negative arousal and emotion. But when we cross the hemisphere and we give it a label or a name, we give the affect a name, well, guess what? We name it and we tame it. And so in my system, I talk about the brain as an organ of change and transformation. I say it's not just tame, we tune it. And sometimes things are like broken records and we need to do a retune. And that's where these more rapid or accelerated healing therapies can be very, very useful. So I don't know if you want me to go into the post-romantic distress. That's what I call it, because something's happening, like you get the call and, you're noticing all these physiological changes. So we talk about the romantic breakups really activate the system of the brain where we're feeling emotional distress. And when that happens in the brain, we also see a lot of information processing in the middle region of the brain. More thoughts, more images, more memory, especially emotional memory. Things are linking, and it's just like a floodgates have opened up with a whole lot of processing. And of course, people really don't feel like themselves during this. So some of those body signs, so if you're wondering like, oh, do I have it? Do I have this post-romantic distress? Well, after a breakup, you're withdrawing from love, but you may also have post-traumatic distress, which is like a physiology change. All right. This is how we know this bottom brain, I call it the emotional brain, is turned on. And so mostly people don't like to tune into it because it's so uncomfortable, but you notice physiological signs like a lot of people have mentioned, like a lump in your throat, or eyes twitching, or blushing, or rashes coming up, butterflies in your stomach, sleep changes, and you can become an instant insomniac. There's lots of restlessness, and racing pulse and pounding heart, unusually rapid breathing, dizziness, sweatiness, shakiness, weak knees, cold feet, pain and tension in different parts of the body from the head to the chest, even gut pain and nausea. And of course, a telltale sign is this increased tearfulness that people talk about. I'm just crying all the time. I'm constantly on edge. The next thing I see or hear is just going to bring me to tears and flushed, sometimes fever, skin, cold, and shaky hands. So these are all ways that emotions show up in the physical body. And we know that, the brain is running these more survival-based systems. Um, so you can notice that most people don't like to attune to it. They don't like to come into it, but that is one of the ways that we update the response pattern is we use interoceptive exposure. We actually have them bring it up. We reactivate that. And then we can process out those sensations. So you don't have to live in fear of them. We kind of go into them to make them new and different. And of course, they're given another understanding of what this is. So just know that if you're going through this and you're having any physiological changes, that is probably this brain-based phenomenon where the lower brain regions take hold of everything to do with emotions, reward seeking, like what you want, what you want to get a craving for or get a dopamine hit on, and all kinds of survival-based systems having to do with like being ostracized from the tribe. This was a survival threat. So there's evolutionary wiring, and it's not you and it's not the breakup, but it's definitely something the brain has been doing. They say, the body keeps a score, but really there isn't a scorecard. I don't like to think of it as, a scorecard. I think of it as like, no, the body is burdened by having to process and respond to something that keeps coming up. And if you're freaking out about sensations or you keep crying, that's kind of an emergency. The sensations become the emergency. One of my clients, she was at a restaurant waiting for some of her friends to arrive, and she looked out on the docks there and she actually saw her ex. And he was working on some project out there. And she said her heart started racing and she left the restaurant before her friends could even arrive. She just called them. She goes, "Hey, I'm not feeling well and I won't be coming to lunch." So you see, those strong sensations cause a lot of discomfort. I mean, it could be like a full-blown panic attack. Just fleeing the scene is what most people like to do when they're experiencing that kind of high arousal. So that's part of what can happen in post-romantic distress. So an X sighting can make you feel like, you're running from a scary monster or something. It's like, oh my gosh, what is this? And it isn't a horror flick, and it's something about what the brain is recognizing as kind of an unexpected. Lots of times it's treating it like if you were walking in a forest and, you saw a snake or something, like it's having this immediate, like, get the body moving. Right. So your brain doesn't really care to make you happy. It's trying to make sure you're not getting eaten. So, yeah, I would say in the post romantic distress mode, you're looking out for, hey, do I feel anything? Because
Mm.
in full recovery, you will notice the absence of that. So a lot of people say, well, how will I feel? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if it would be okay. It would be like totally okay not to have an emergency alarm go off every time you see your ex or, feel like you're having uncontrollable emotions and sensations. So, yeah.
Mm. And I can imagine that, there are some other things that could bring back all of these distress signals. It could be a text from the ex, or maybe coming up on a social media memory, or looking through photos in your phone, just
Absolutely. Yeah.
bringing it all to the surface.
Yeah, because it's all data, right? Like whether it's the digital diet of stuff that people are taking in from the internet or from text messaging, like this comes to represent the person. Like with hoarding, people have a great difficulty getting rid of stuff, and it's usually because it has some sentimental association. It's not like I'm getting rid of a picture of my ex. It's like I'm getting rid of my ex. So people have to clear out stuff. They have to detox. There's things that were definitely part of the relationship that could make you think about the relationship because in the lower brain, it's more of an animal brain that learns by association, more like classical conditioning too. So it's an easy reminder. It's like, oh, that truck is like his truck, or, she always wore, mini skirts, and so these are things that when you see it, songs, like a lot of people relate to music and that was their song or, it reminds me of it. There's a big business in songwriting and there's lots of, love stuck songs. Then they speak to this because it's so much a part of the human condition. But we really haven't approached it by using the science of love and how we fall in love and breakup, heartbreak to get the healing. And so that's what I'm bringing forward. I think it's time. We know enough now. We don't know everything, but we know enough to really target some of these key systems and we can start to look at grief science realities instead of these grief myths. But the grief and heartbreak myth is that it takes a long time and that you never get over the loss. I don't know if you remember, Paige, there was this, if you're with somebody for 10 years, it's going to take you 5 years to get over them. It's some kind of like breakup.
Yeah. You divide by
Like,
two or
yeah,
times by
exactly.
six
Well, where
or
do they get that from? I mean, somebody just made it up, and that it's time that heals. No, it isn't time that heals. Individuals recover from the loss, and the science really supports that targeting the brain to mend the heart versus just waiting for time to heal. And maybe
Mm.
through brain plasticity, you're just stabilizing it. You're talking to everybody about it. You keep checking, you're getting more and more data to come in and limit and confuse and even activate the emotional centers, right? I teach people how to be aware of what's going on in their brain and how to use their knowledge of this to kind of shine the light on what systems do automatically so that you're not played by the brain. You play your brain for change. You actually start to become more meta aware or mindful, and that mindfulness even begins to alter it. But then we've got all these kind of tricks that really are more bottom up techniques that work with the body and things like eye movement and tapping, and so you're causing a shift to occur. You don't have to sit there and wait for time to heal. You could actually start to accelerate the recovery so you could be at peace and clear-headed, right? And know what you want. And then most importantly, be free to love. So when
Mm.
I'm talking about it, I'm taking people from love stuck to love struck with this higher kind of genius reality that we create love. We're not looking for it, we're making it happen. And then sometimes, accepting breakup stuff is not easy, right? And the Kubler-Ross stages, right? When you went through your training. And I don't know if you remember, I took a course on death and dying, as an undergraduate. That was like over 30 years ago. But it was about people. Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed a theory about people's individual dying process, right? Moving through these stages. And the theory was created for those diagnosed with a terminal illness, but we've applied it to everything. There's the 5 stages of grief, if you lose your job, if you lose a pet, if and the stages loosely apply to many life losses, right? But they don't really tell you how to recover. They're just kind of more like saying, okay, you're going to go through stages, but depending on what you're processing, depending on where you're stuck in how these different brain systems are operating. So that's why there's not a linear movement through the stages. People go back and forth. Sometimes you're angry, sometimes, you're depressed. And then, of course, it does move into this freedom, which is something like radical acceptance. I was showing a film to some therapists because I do train them in the model, and a client was saying, she had remained friends with her ex. And a lot of people try to do that, right? Like, let's just hang on, it won't be romantic. We're not seriously committed, but we can be friends and do things together, And, she says very platonic. Some people have the friends with benefits kind of thing, but this remained really platonic. She said sometimes she would, and that 2 months time that they did it, she kind of pushed to see if it could get romantic, and clearly not. He had made up his mind. But she said, after a while, that helped her see that she just couldn't hold out this hope, that seeing him actually made it more difficult. And many times that's what the breakup research shows, that in order to facilitate this kind of emotional pain response, that it's better to take a break physically, right? So the physical separation helps with the healing, and the emotional kind of, I can live without you. I do
Mm.
things, right? And so that can get worked through. But it's tempting. And I think a lot of people ask that, they'll write in and say, can I be friends with my ex? What about, well, it's confusing to the brain. Let's say you were addicted to donuts. It would be easier for the brain to learn to stay away from donuts than to eat them just sometimes or every now and then, kind of that intermittent reinforcement, right? So it's kind of working on that craving addictive level as well, that it sees it as an opportunity. And so going cold turkey is easier than doing it in moderation. It's not that you couldn't sometimes come back to that, but in those early stages, it's better if it can be out.
Is there a time period for that, or is that dependent on that person's particular healing?
Yeah, I think the second, what you said, it's really depending on that person's healing, because here's the key question. And I always ask people, I don't assume, we want to know what is going on. What about this is most upsetting? Because you're not going to say as a therapist, like, oh, well, I've gone through a breakup, so I know exactly how you feel because, he lied or she cheated. And so you have this you don't know that. So you kind of ask the question to get a full picture on what is the brain putting together about this? Like, where are you in pain and stuck? Where is the love stuckness? Is it some belief that's formed, some meaning? Is it some memory that keeps replaying? Is it this kind of hook to keep trying to get the reward? Is it just kind of addicted to it used to be good and it's like trying to repeat the cycle and get it back how it used to be? So that kind of thing is keeping it open. And I think everyone's individual and how much time it takes, or whether or not they even go back. I mean, it's much easier for people. What do they say? The best revenge is to have a great life. But it's even better than that. It's like to find someone that you're truly compatible with and wants a relationship with you. And so I'll teach people how, when we're looking for love, you're sorting through different groups so that you're not fishing in the wrong pond. There's plenty of fish. Yeah. But if you're in the wrong pond, if you're not with somebody who wants committed relationship, or you're not compatible with them, and they're not caring and they don't communicate, then they don't have this love, right? So I'm thinking that in the highest level of how the brain operates, if we're going to create love, we want to create love states where I bring it, I know how to love at the highest level and communicate and share that with vulnerability, openness, and so do they. And then that's really the true match. So then I
The
call it
give and
love,
take.
love. So it's not like I'm looking for love. No, you're going to create love, love. So you need to know how to sort and pick somebody who can have amazing love,
Hmm.
right? And instead of saying, oh, well, somebody's, wounded, and so I'm going to help them. Many people can't leave a relationship because they're afraid what will happen to this other person. It's not really their emotional distress about being separate from them. It's the whole idea that, they've threatened suicide, or that they're going to expose you. One of my clients had somebody took pictures, during the relationship, and then they posted these nudes on a website, and another friend called and said, hey, you have pictures. Like, oh my gosh. You can't be friends with the people that we were friends with. So there's many things that can get very painful about it and that could get people stuck. And so we unpack that. But, if you've had friends that were kind of stuck on their ex and talking about it a lot, they're probably saying things like, you need to move on. Like they are so tired of hearing the conversation again and again. You're talking about it. So many people will actually make a referral of a family member or a friend to me saying, you really need to talk to Dr. Elizabeth about this because, you know, I can see it, but I can't explain it, but she can explain it. Because when people say you need to move on, what does that mean? That move on and learn to love yourself kind of are these vague statements that are tossed around in, the breakup vernacular, but people are like, I don't know what that is. What's wrong with me? Why can't I move on? What's the move, here, so the move
And
on
then even more
is confusing.
shame kind of
Yeah, and
perpetuating
shame.
that.
Yeah. Right, because you don't know. But really, it's like you don't have a clear understanding of what the solution is here. How would you have an accelerated resolution? We're not talking about that. So, people try to make sense of how an experience of loss changes them. And even the breakup literature says there's two things that are going on after a breakup. We've got the emotional arousal, and that's the post-romantic distress. It's very physical, visceral, somatic in the body. And then we have self-concept changes. Well, why? Because we're trying to understand ourselves. It's like, I'm an emotional basket case. I'm a mess. That's what I am. And they don't see it as something their brain is doing. They see it as they become this, because it just kind of takes over. It's just this wave. So being love stuck is, like you're not in your rational mind, but
Yeah.
but you're still having a lot of thoughts. And so that's another thing I teach with my brain-based model is that much of our thinking is colored by emotion when it comes up in that lower brain system, and then it gets racy and very distorted, very illogical. Sometimes we'll pick up and, cognitive therapists teach about cognitive distortions, but I teach on how this midline region defaults into automatic thinking. So you're not choosing to be a negative thinker or have negativity bias. It's a feature of how your brain operates. You're just getting played by it. And then there's all kinds of tools and techniques, starting with becoming aware of it and non-reactive, right? And not thinking it's you, but also how to change what you're thinking,
Mm.
and especially the meaning, or if they're narratives and stories, that's another thing, that part of the brain is a social brain. And so it's, getting information by watching others. I don't know if you've seen like America's Funniest Videos and people are getting hurt and you're just sitting there going, oh, wow. The mirror neuron system of the brain just really gets you feeling another's pain and you automatically try it on. Like your brain just puts you in that role of somebody doing that. I mean, advertisers know that. So they show people eating delicious food and we're like, oh, that's good. Like, let's DoorDash that, right? It's so easy now just to get it. And so when we see people in pain, we also start generating ideas about what's causing that, right? And it's automatic. It's not necessarily all the information. Sometimes it's stereotypical kind of shortcuts in the way that we think. So I teach about a brain processing that has to do with the science of cognition, which most therapists don't learn about it. They just think, oh, we're just rational and if you're thinking, stinky and stuff, that's the problem. You're choosing that, but you don't actually choose it, and it really changes your thinking after a breakup because you're in a stress mode and your thinking isn't so sound. It's
It's
not guided.
intrusive.
Yeah, it can be very intrusive, right? It just pops in there, and it's not just thoughts, ideas. Sometimes it's images,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just
Mm-hmm.
images of stuff or sounds. And, so yeah. And guess what? What we learned about the brain from that whole default mode was it came on most when we were idle. So, if you're busy, if you have a lot of tasks that you're doing, you're going from client to client, or, you're a teller, so your day is taken up by structured appointments and lots to do. You don't have much time to think. But when you're going home or you're about to fall asleep at night, this is when it really speeds up, right? So it's coming on, this characteristic way of thinking, which I call middle brain, is most active when you're not busy. So bored or idle or in transition.
So what
And
do
you
you
get that.
do during, that time?
Well, you
And
need to know that that's a time when your thinking doesn't need to be, attended to so much, right? That you could have an emotional response to it. I teach people that if you have one, then your brain is doing something with it, whether it's true or not, right? So if it could even get into beliefs like I'm not good enough and no one would ever love me because of this. So, the rational thinking would be like, no, we could poo-poo on that. You would never even say the things you're thinking to another person. But see, our brain gets away with just coming up with it. And the more we hear these tunes, I call them tunes, the more familiar, the more we let them through. So you
Mhm.
kind of want to develop, this kind of bouncer mentality, like a bouncer in a club, like the VIP lounge, like you don't get in here. Like this is useless. It's not happening. It's not true. And so that you don't have to burden the emotional system with having to process and respond. So this is part of what I'm teaching in the rewiring. So it's actually a brain plasticity system where these common thoughts, and we go through lots of them and we find out what your common thoughts are, we retune them. We have them, do something new with them so that they can't just burden them and make them do things about this and feel bad about themselves. There's blame-based thinking where people that are in a lot of distress will say it's because this breakup or this event happened or this, terrible situation. That's why I feel this way. And then you mentioned it earlier, there's where the lens goes in and it's shame-based. It's because I didn't control this, or it was my fault, or guilt, or I'm not enough. So it's a very old tune for many people. And it got in when they were very young, when they were very egocentric. Like we even go back to early attachment histories, and sometimes it's parental divorces and people leaving. So
Mm.
in some way, it's shaping the network of why that would come up for that person. And so we just brain scan back, we find that initial sensitizing event. Some of these techniques like hypnosis is wonderful with it. Art makes that same suggestion that the brain will come up with a scene match, and then we're just processing it through. The
Mm.
good thing about these more primitive systems, the lower brain systems, they don't know the difference between real and imagined. So we can get away with suggesting many good things too, and making that tilt towards positivity and the freedom from heartbreak. And I think that that's amazing. And therapists that don't take advantage of that, your clients are just going to suffer. It's like how much, Kleenex are we going to use before things start to shift, right? It's not just about the validating. It is painful, but it doesn't have to stay that way. So I like to look at those myths versus what we can do with the new science of healing heartbreak and these new therapies, right?
Yeah. What would you suggest if mainstream media, or you have friends telling you, or you have your therapist telling you, time heals all wounds, or move on, get over it? And, you're this person going through a breakup, going through this kind of distress. How do we go into breaking free from all that is surrounded by you that's trying to keep you actually in that love stuck? place.
Yeah, well, I think people just ignore it. I mean, like I said, it's too vague and confusing when you say to somebody, you just need to move on or you just need to learn to love yourself. I was watching that Netflix documentary, the Escaping Twin Flames,
Yeah.
something
Oh my
where they were saying,
gosh.
"Oh, you're just not trying hard enough. You know, you need to do this like mirror technique where you blame yourself. It's like a projection kind of thing, and it's you, and they really are in love with you. And it's like, oh my gosh, these are very negative suggestions to people." Right. They got people, jailed for stalking and, terrible things. They're really educated people too. So, yeah, be cautious of what your therapist or friend is saying to you. Don't listen to it. A lot of times it'll just fall by the wayside. But if they're very, authoritarian, you've got to do this, and, yeah, that's harder. But usually people are like, yeah, yeah, you don't understand. And
Yeah.
so that's part of this. If you don't understand where people are stuck or in pain on it, and then you make them feel bad by suggesting they shouldn't be, then you don't have an inroad to change it. I mean, that's just not going to work. So this is
Mm.
very real. Heartbreak pain is real. It hurts, but you have no pain without your brain. So even if you stub your toe, it's going to take until that comes via nerves to your brain for you to even know that you're in pain. And so I like, looking at the science realities of this heartbreak and what it's suggesting about these rapid alternatives. So they reduce the stress and distress. We get at the troubling meanings and memories that get in the way of the getting over the ex or even finding new love. And it's different than talk therapy. Talk therapy doesn't work for a lot of this because they don't really understand what it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
After my last heartbreak, I did 3 ART sessions, accelerated resolution therapy, which is part of your protocol.
Yeah.
And I was a completely different person. I just like could not even recognize myself or even believe that I would be doing so good so soon, just even like weeks after a breakup.
Yeah.
How is it that these huge transformations can be done so quickly?
Well, we think it is because we're doing a re-exposure. We thought for a long time that, a reactivation of this target learning or exposure opens the brain for change. But we're doing stuff that's different during the process. We're just not opening it so people can have catharsis and cry or release something. Like that's the old model, sort of the industrial revolution model is, just it's a catharsis, you've got to scream, let go. And here, I mean, I don't know if you remember from your session, you're doing things with processing out the post-romantic distress stuff that's coming up. You have a particular thought or scene that you're holding. It's an image, and a lot can be replaced or erased with the image. That's a suggestion, putting in new perspectives and ways of being, you know, yeah. You did a
Or
lot, in
yeah.
that time, but it was very active. And for the brain, it loves novelty. The brain loves and will change quickly. So it isn't this slow, gradual, incremental thing. Like if you're learning to play piano or, maybe you're learning something of a skill and it takes effort and you have to keep practicing it. Like even good things for the brain, like meditation or yoga, like involve a practice. They're like compensatory and you do them and there's changes in the brain when you practice these things. But this stuff is a one and done or three and done. It's so rapid. And we think it's because it's changing the emotional response. It kind of delinks it from automatically playing, right? So in art, we say you keep the knowledge, but you lose the pain. Like, the breakup happened, but there's this new way of being with it and new images, and most of the pain is processed out. And we even in my retune process, I'll say, let's reactivate it. Let's imagine you're going to run into him or you're going to see him with another person, or, we really test it out. And it's like, Doc, I got nothing. What is this? I can't even believe my brain is doing it because see, you weren't choosing to do it. This wasn't a choice or a decision. And that's the part, this, other two-thirds of the brain that's not so rational. We need different ways to be able to influence it. And hypnosis is one of those ways. The eye movement reprocessing therapies is one of those ways. Even tapping, emotional freedom technique can be one of those ways. And so, what I'm using is a protocol, which I call a retune protocol, where how we expose the brain to the memory so that it will not have that response, but it will replace it with a new response. And in the memory reconsolidation science, it says we must mismatch those and juxtapose them. We're going to just slam them together. And once we do it, the memory is altered for good. So this is a new paradigm for how the brain changes. It's not extinction. Extinction would keep it at bay. You would keep doing something to kind of keep it, and like Pavlovian conditioning, even that would come back, right, from all the pairings. But in memory reconsolidation science, it's saying there is a brand new pathway and it just takes off and it's using that way, and the other one is eliminated from you. So, and I've seen, and I have long-term, research data and longitudinal data on people, and they'll come back and say, will you do what we did for this on this,
Yeah,
because
proves
it
that
doesn't
it
work.
works.
It does work, yeah. So,
Hmm.
right. And I say, go ahead and test it. See if you can get it. See if
I
you can
love
get
that.
angry. See if you can get the panic grief. It's like, how did that happen? It is. It's just amazing. The brain can change fast. It does with
Hmm.
trauma. It does with, I mean, it changed with heartbreak overnight. And, there is some stuff related to how we think about ourselves and the self-concept changing. But I think when we get more awareness about how the negativity bias comes up and how the brain, travels time and brings up and replays the past and drags it into the future, when you get a good understanding of how that process is going on, you're more empowered to create who you want to be post breakup. That's
I
the new
love that.
perspective. Who do you want to be? Because your brain is so good at taking in and doing for you. But if left to time to heal or these negative patterns of emotion and mental processing, you can get really stuck easy.
Yeah.
So if it's not shifting, sometimes we say with acute stress, give yourself like, 6 weeks, right? And if you don't feel like it's getting better, then you're getting more stuck. We want to look out for that.
Hmm. I love
Yeah,
this.
like an adjustment. It's an adjustment disorder, right? That's how it's like, okay, it's going to pass, and you
Hmm.
know, right? But if you're having nightmares, crying yourself to sleep, and it's been months or years, then it's time to do something about that. Don't wait for time to heal. It isn't
Mm.
because of the relationship. It's because of something the brain is doing,
Yeah.
right? And plus that's so painful that you're really not in your right mind for love, right?
No.
So what I'm teaching people is about how their mind can not work after a breakup, and then it can work for you, and it can even change your brain. And that's, the mind, that flow of information and energy, and just being aware of what the brain can do. We need to use the science to explain that, not age-old, outdated theories.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you are, coming in like a wrecking ball and just changing everything
I'm going to
with
stir it up. Absolutely. Yeah.
good, good. I'm excited for it. Well, are there any other last things before we wrap up here that listeners who may be going through a heartbreak should know, or if they know someone who's going through a heartbreak, maybe how to help them?
Well, in general, I have some resources out there, and you can look at some of the stuff I've written because, like I said, you can really get into these myths, into the frustration, and not know how to help people. But, you know, telling them maybe look at this is something that your brain is doing and it's not you,
Yes,
that your
perfect.
brain can change. I mean, right? And then people will get better. And like I said, it does go much quicker if you're doing something than not. If
Hmm.
you're developing more depression or suicidal thinking or really getting into negative habits like over drinking, overeating. These are ways that people self-medicate too, right? So some people have been concerned about their friends doing that because they're just really taking a deeper dive in and looking for something to make them feel better.
Hmm.
Your brain doesn't want to make you feel bad, but it's definitely burdened with trying to process and do a lot. And so we've got to get them to understand this is just data and
Yeah.
they're going to be okay.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. If listeners are really fired up by what you have to say, where can they find you or learn more about you?
Well, I'd left a link for you to some of this brain perspective stuff. I have a little mini course on rapid recovery from heartbreak that introduces that brain model. I also have a quiz if you're wondering, like, am I stuck? Like, is it more of a bottom, a middle, a top brain? These are very interactive systems, but sometimes, you can just see symptom wise where you're more stuck. And then again, we will look at whole brain interventions because a lot of this like insight and rational thinking isn't changing this like art will or
Yeah.
hypnosis. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I've been teaching hypnosis for a long time. I have a brain-based hypnotherapy online academy where if people want to learn about the brain model and how they can use that, they can take a course and that get certified hours for the national board. And I'm always helping therapists because I want them to move out of the talk therapy models for this and do stuff, do art and other things to really help people heal
Mm,
rapidly.
yes. Yeah. We don't have to be stuck anymore.
No,
Uh,
no.
well, thank you so much. I appreciate all the knowledge that you shared today. I'm just so excited about just all the science that is out there and how you're just like really leading the field in recovering from heartbreak and how it doesn't just have to drag on forever. So,
Yeah,
thank you so much for
absolutely
being
not.
here.
Yeah. Thank you. It was wonderful. And I hope this will help people. I also want to mention the Helen Fisher's Anatomy of Love. She has some nice videos on the fMRI studies on the brain in heartbreak mode that I think people would love to see, that gets at these different systems that I'm talking about as well. My model's easier to understand than some of the big terms that they use. I want something that's simple science that sticks and stays with people so that they can become brain changers and really transform their lives and love more.
Yes, make it
Yeah.
easy to understand.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, I will have all of the links so you can find out more about Dr. Elizabeth Micus and all of her work in the show notes. Thank you so much, and until next time.